So Leinster Munster Pro 14 semi-final tomorrow, and I'm astonished to read during the week that Munster had returned 1,000 tickets back from the allocation of about 5,000. They'd said that a bunch of fans had sort of picked up tickets on the general release, but that Munster fans, the greatest fans in the world, Quinny, as we know, have returned 1,000 tickets for the game. That's what's going on.
I was surprised at that. Maybe there's a fear that maybe they may not get the result, and I don't know really what happened. I was surprised with that because it's I think it's 25% allocation for Munster, and I'm sure, and I spoke to a lot of people who have bought on the general sale, and there were people living in Dublin here getting tickets through the clubs, but surprising.
The Edinburgh game wasn't sold out either. In the qualifier, whatever it was called, the quarter-final qualifier, whatever you're having, in Thomond Park wasn't sold out as well. But I presume it's not. Is it? I mean, any sense that it's demonstrative of something bigger in terms of a disconnect between Munster?
No, I don't think so. Look, I think there was issues with people going to the games maybe 2 years ago when there was maybe a bit of frustration around some of the results. And look, success, and it's the same for any club. If you're winning things, it's probably people turn up more, and the fans can be a little bit fickle at times that way. But I think it's that time of year as well, Adrian. There's communions, there's confirmations, there's loads of different things on, people travelling up, the financial implication of it. So, yeah, and it was probably the same a couple of weeks ago. I was surprised with that game in Thomond Park that the crowd was small, but sometimes that can happen this time of year. There's so many fixtures that people have attended throughout the year, since last September, so it's financially it's a big hit as well. That one, the quarter-final, was outside your season ticket holders, so you would have had to pay separately. And aside from, I'm not making excuses for them, but if you're bringing a couple of kids to a game and travel and food and all that stuff, it's an expense. And if you're going week on week, so that's probably one that with the weather that weekend and everything, I was surprised, because it was a big fixture, and it's a lot of people would have been in France the week before as well, so it's hard to get them all.
That's fair. There's context.
There's a lot of travel with it, there's a lot of travel, and for people to come up to Dublin this weekend, and it's pricey enough for them to do that again when they've been there so many times. But you just think this fixture...
Well, it's huge. It's a season... it could be a season changer for Munster.
It could be career changing for some players. If they can get a result against Leinster, it can have a massive implication, knock-on effect. There's an Australia tour coming up. If they stand out in this fixture the weekend, they could put themselves right in the shop window and get on that tour, and obviously get to a final next week and maybe win a trophy, which would be huge for Munster, given their progress and what they're trying to develop and build there, and given Leinster's dominance, particularly in Europe this year. They were the best team in Europe and deservedly won the competition. So there's a huge prize if you're in the Munster dressing room and thinking, geez, we have a chance here to do something special. The conundrum is, where do we get the win from? How do we develop a win? How do we play? Can we hurt them? Can we attack them? Can we score tries?
Yeah. We've Eoin Reddan on the line as well. Morning, Eoin.
Morning.
Just been speaking a little bit about Munster there. Get your sense from the Leinster point of view, just in terms of, read some of the players after last year's semi-final defeat in the Champions Cup and how that impacted on them in the later stages of the Pro 12. And they'd kind of said that it had fragmented them a little bit, that actually they'd started questioning themselves in a slightly different way that they hadn't really expected. Is it possible that the win in the Champions Cup and all that comes with it might have not necessarily a fragmented impact on them, but I mean there can be a negative impact from that sort of thing too?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few sore bodies, and maybe a few guys won't make it due to the mightn't have been the most amazing match in the world last week, but it was certainly one of the most physical I've seen at that level. So I think you have a few tired bodies and a few guys who mightn't make it. At the same time, you've guys who've proven themselves all year in a Leinster jersey, and a lot of them even in earlier rounds of the Heineken Cup and some big games that then maybe didn't play in the latter stages. And thinking of someone like Byrne, maybe, who if Johnny Sexton wasn't fit, might step in there. So I think for Leinster, it's for the guys who played last week, it's probably relishing a challenge of having Munster in the RDS, because the last time Leinster won a Heineken Cup and played Munster the week after was down in Thomond Park, and we definitely got sent home with our tail between our legs. And to have that kind of a come down a week after winning such a big trophy. And to people on the outside, you might think you'd get over that pretty quickly. But to be honest, it was a tough night, and even for me, it would still live with me today. That feeling, even though you'd won a Heineken Cup the week before. So I think for the guys who won last week and played last week, they're going to be relishing the chance of having Munster at home. For guys who didn't play last week and who are going to play this week, there's obviously pressure on them to kind of keep things going, and that's a different type of pressure, But all in all, I think it's probably a positive for Leinster to have won last week and to be having Munster at home this week. I think it's easier for them to have that game mentally than to be playing a team that they mightn't have such a huge rivalry with, like maybe Glasgow or Edinburgh or something like that. I think this is a perfect fixture for a week after, albeit with some tired bodies.
Yeah, that game that you mentioned, 2011, and it was a Joe Schmidt Leinster team, obviously, and he kind of spoke afterwards about the fact that Leinster team were fatigued, spoke about things like, Munster wanted this more. Like, they're all factors that can very easily apply to tomorrow's game. So, like, what do they need to do differently to the way you guys would have prepared for that game, or obviously the end result?
Well, I think that the thing is, at that point in our journey with Leinster, you're trying to win a trophy, and then since then Leinster have tried to work out how to kind of win trophies in the near term, but at the same time look after the long term, and that was one of the challenges that was very hard last year for Leinster, which is how do we look after this year and next year and the year after and still manage to win an away semi-final against Claremont and a home semi-final against Scarlets. If Leinster had just focused on last year, they may have gotten over the line on one of those competitions, but instead Leo was planning on for the future while managing the short term, just like anyone would do in any business, and I think because of all that planning, he's in a different spot now. He's actually in a position now where he can go and win that game last week, and he's got players who can then go and deliver for him this week, and they won't necessarily be the same players. So I think that work has been done, and you couldn't just turn it around. If you're asking yourself, okay, I've been here before, I won a Heineken Cup, what do I do differently in the next 6 days or 7 days between now and the semi-final? You're gone. It's too late to worry about it then. You've got to start that planning back in September, which is what Leinster have done. And they really are looking after both now in terms of winning trophies this season, but they've also been looking after the next few years all throughout this season as well, and it puts them in a really good position for this week.
Redzer, it's Quinny here. Is it easier in a sense that this is going to be a home game? They don't have to travel like in 2011. You had to come down to Limerick, pack up the bags, go the day before. They're at home all week, and maybe the experience of 2011, will that have been spoken about this week, do you think?
Yeah, 100% it would have. And and if I was in the dressing room, I'd be saying it's a chance to put it to bed. And I think Johnny played, Issa played. So I think there is a chance to put some teams to bed. Hard to believe that they might still have demons in their head, but knowing them, they probably do. And I agree with you. Like, being at home is a huge difference. And when I think of it from a Munster point of view, it's going to be a very tough occasion. I think I got the tail end of your tickets thing. Like, the only other side of that is there's so many Limerick and Cork people living in Dublin anyway that it's not really. It's hard to kind of work out exactly. What split there's going to be there. I think it'll be an amazing occasion, just like it is every time it's been on the Aviva. So I think that both teams will be very well supported. But I think for some of the Munster players, like some of the chat I heard during the week, Quinny, I thought was spot on with someone like Keith Earl saying, we get the first chance to have a shot off them. And I thought, that sounds good. That's actually a really good mentality to have. But then I heard some other comments later on the week saying that there's not much difference between us and Leinster. We've been to 4 finals, or 4 semi-finals in the last few years, and you know better than I do, like, getting to a semi-final compared to winning a Heineken Cup, like, the difficulty level in both of those is harder when vastly different.
When you get to that level, only a semi-final, it just gets harder as it cranks up that pressure.
Absolutely, and I think, if you've got Munster players saying, look, Leinster are way better than us, this is where we're at, and we need to work hard to get better at it, then, or, for example, this weekend we need to be really up for it because Leinster are actually obviously a good bit better than us at the moment, then they have a chance of winning. If they're going in there thinking there's not much difference between us and and they're kind of,
I don't think they are thinking that. Yeah. Maybe someone has said it, but I think the reality is I think people know where both sides are at. And we were just mentioning, Redzer, there, the opportunity for Munster guys, if I was in that Munster dressing room, I'd be thinking, Jesus, this is a chance to enhance my career. This can be kind of life-changing moment because you're beating the European champions, there's a summer tour, you have a chance of winning a trophy. So there's a massive amount of motivation in the bigger picture, not just winning the game for Munster. Now, will they do it is another question, but there's huge motivation there for them, isn't there?
There is, and I think for someone like JJ, who's probably going to play 10, like, when you're playing rugby a long time and you're not actually in the space you want to be in, it's quite difficult because he loves big games, and yet because he wouldn't be starting enough, he wouldn't be playing in the big games. So tomorrow's kind of a bit of an arrival for him where he wants to be, you know, and it is a big game, and he'll probably get the start. So, you know, it's a big game for him. You know, conversely to that, you know, because he hasn't played at 10 in those knockout games before, you know, it's unfair almost to expect too much of him, you know, because we're all hoping that he'll go out and be brilliant and be another option for Ireland and everything. But, you know, it's going to be tricky for him. Like, there'll be less space than there is in any game during the year. Leinster will come harder than they have in any game they've played against Munster already. So it'll be a tough ask, but I think it is set up for him in some ways for him to go out and have a stormer, you know.
Oh, you mentioned Johnny Sexton a bit earlier there, and the consensus seems to be, Rory O'Connor writes about it in the Irish Independent this morning, that he isn't going to start. He's got that groin strain carried over from the last game. And Rory O'Connor certainly writes about the likelihood that Ross Byrne is going to start in that position, and you've mentioned that as well. Joey Carbery's obviously the backup 10 at Ireland. It seems he might come in at 15, is certainly one of the theories. What's the thinking behind not putting the Ireland backup 10 at 10 when the first Leinster pick is out?
Well, I think Ross Byrne has played 19 times for Leinster or something, out half this year, and played in the Heineken Cup, in the European Cup pool games at 10, and it's just a natural choice at this point for this team that he's been playing 10 when Johnny hasn't, and that's so to do anything else at this point for Leinster would be a bit odd, you know.
Do you think that impacts on? I mean, I don't know if there's a broader point in it, but certainly my reading of this morning, do you think that impacts on Carbery's decision on what he does with his career after the season?
Well, I think with Ireland, you've had a train of thought, and you kind of go down a certain road, and then you follow that road through, and like that's one thing that both Joe and Leo would be renowned for, is like planning and then following the plans through. At the moment, you know, when Leo has a plan that when Johnny's not starting, he starts Ross, and when Johnny is starting, he starts Joey, because Joey might bring him something in near the end of a game that might be a bit different. And like they're kind of just pushing on with those plans at the moment. You know, where those plans converge and what would happen if Johnny couldn't play for Ireland, for example, and how that would all pan out over a course of a few games would be very interesting. You know, they're both very good players, and I don't know the ins and outs of who's been looked at where, but both of them, of course, like if there's opportunities in other provinces to play week in, week out, and those provinces are strong enough, then of course they would look at it and think about where can I play more rugby. At the end of the day, that's what players want to do. If you're not playing, to be honest, if you're in a team and you're on the fringes of it and it's winning Heineken Cups or European Cups, and Quinlan will say the same to you, you're not necessarily going home at night thinking you've won anything, you know. So playing is first and foremost, and contributing is a huge part of keeping your sanity when you're playing.
I'd be keen to get your thoughts on how Munster can hurt Leinster from the half-back position tomorrow, because you look at Teddy Ira-Byrne's performance last weekend. It was obviously an unbelievable individual performance, but was there anything from a scrum half's perspective that you saw that Conor Murray can use tomorrow?
Well, the guy last weekend kicked very well in the first half, but he was terrible in the second half. You know, like standing around letting balls pop out of the rucks, and this is Ibrahim. Like, so that was a huge loss for them in the end for Mashino. Like, if Mashino had been playing, you know, you saw how physical wrestling were without him. If he had been playing, like, that could have been a different result. And also, if either of the two tens had lasted the game, it would have been a tougher game for Leinster. You know, I think both halfbacks for wrestling in the second half were anonymous practically, aside from the scrum half's kicking. You know, this weekend, yeah, I mean, like, you know, Conor's obviously a world-class scrum half, and any bit of period of time in the Leinster 22, and he's going to be a danger. His kicking game is going to be important. You know, but Leinster are very good in the air, and that's not always the solution. You saw against Saracens last year when in the semi-final when Munster went to the kicking game, and now Duncan Williams was playing. But against teams that are good in the air, that might work for a little bit, and then you've got to change. You got to play a little bit. I think I've seen enough from Munster so far this year that they can challenge them playing with the ball. Leinster's defence in the last few weeks, however, has looked rock solid and looked very, very aggressive. So the other thing is, I think the intensity of the game, Leinster are probably more used to that intensity now over the last few weeks, and due to the amount of players they have playing at international level. And maybe you could argue Munster after the racing quarter will be a bit more aware from the start. I think the fact they've had 2 weeks planning for this will mean they'll come up with some plans that you're referring to there, like to actually unlock Leinster.
Where do they attack them though, Redzer? That's what I'm trying to figure out, and people are asking me, where aside from maybe taking on Leinster up front and the maul and around the fringes, and Stander making good carries, and Munster can be very good when they build that intensity, in fairness. Can they attack him out wide? Get the ball to Conway. Leinster's defence has been very, very good, as you said. Is there any chance there?
I think they need to, like, Munster's defence, in the last few years has been one of their weapons, right? Like, if they can get off the line hard and put pressure on Leinster and get Leinster in a position where what Leinster have been brilliant at this year is, say against Scarlets, who are an excellent defensive team, Leinster kicked the ball all day long, and still won by 40 points. But they started the game, kicked the ball, and then Scarlets had to play, which meant their defence was no longer the big part of the game. Like, Munster needs to kind of do that to Leinster tomorrow. Their defence needs to be, as aggressive as it has been the last few years, as physical, and has to really, you have to feel it in the first few minutes. When we see the first few tackles, you've got to see, oh God, Leinster aren't going anywhere here. And that's when, you can start to get doubts creeping in, and that's when Leinster might try and do something like play a bit more than they should. And Keith Earls or Andrew Conway picks up an intercept or a penalty or whatever. I think that's the way. I think being rock solid in defence is actually the most important thing against Leinster. Because if you're solid in D, and you frustrate them a little bit, they'll go to the air. Then you've got guys who are good in the air. Munster have guys who are very good in the air. So I think that's probably the way to do it. Like, Leinster's defence, like, Exeter will be renowned for an excellent defensive team now, and Leinster have really, really mastered this. You saw last week, like, they got caught up in behind a few times from Racing 9 kicking long. But Leinster have, over the course of the year, really worked on having, a really good balance between in the front line and in the backfield. And most teams are trying it now, where they have 12 or 13 in the front line and maximum 2 in the back line, in the backfield, like with a full back and scrum half or full back and a winger. And if you watch Leinster when they play teams, they achieve that setup more often than most. So the simple answer is, it's not easy to attack against Leinster, and up front is not the answer either. Like, they're a world-class pack now as well. So you've got to keep your discipline. Racing didn't do that last week. You've got to be very physical. You've got to defend really, really well, and you've got to be brilliant in the air. And I think if you do those 4 things, and then you're in the game with 10, 15 minutes to go, and then you can kind of rely on being able to play the game out and keeping your head for the last 10, 15 minutes and see what happens. But if you get any of the first 4 wrong, you're staring at a long day, I think.
We're going to ask, we'll talk to Quinlan a little bit more about that game. But before we let you away, Owen, we'll get your thoughts on the other semi-final this weekend, the Warriors against the Scarlets at Scottstown at 7:45. Tykes Byrne obviously is the kind of interesting angle on this one from our point of view, and the fact that he's off to Munster next season. The thought struck me that the Scarlets play a very different game to Munster, and it'll be a whole new challenge for a player like Tykes Byrne playing under a different system next season. How do you expect him to go when he makes the transition?
Yeah, I think he'll be absolutely fine. I think at minimum what he's done in Scarlets is learn how to play more ball, and play with the ball in his hands and pass and run when it's on and pass when it's on. And for anyone, that's good. I mean, Tykes' biggest strength is obviously over the ball, which is incredible for someone of his height. And as you see in latter stages of competitions, people know that he can do that, and people target him all week. There'll be a guy in a yellow bib for Glasgow this week called Tykes Byrne, in training, and they'll go into the game and they'll target him, and he'll still rob ball. And that's when you start getting into, world-class territory, when you can do that. It's okay at the start of a season when people mightn't spot you and they don't really know you're coming. But near the end of the year, if you're still robbing balls at that level, that's an incredible feat. So I think he'll go really, really well. He's an incredibly humble guy who works really hard. I mean, in Leinster, when he was injured for so long, he kept his head, and he literally didn't play for 2 years, and was diligent with his rehab. I often was injured in and out and having to train with him, and literally day in, day out. And to see someone who, could take an easy option and maybe finish up rugby and start a job or take a very, average kind of salary and take a punt on going to Wales, you don't hear it very often. And to me, it speaks volumes about what he thought he could do in the game, and he went over there to try and turn it around. And often when you see that happen and you see a guy make a decision like that, it's almost that kind of desire to keep going and the lengths you'll go to, moving away from your family to, not the most glamorous part of the world, just because you think you can and you think that this isn't over yet. And I think that's probably the part of his personality that has led him to where he is now, and which also means that, he didn't go over to Wales so that he could come back and play for Leinster or Munster for a few times. He went over there because he thought he could play for Ireland and he thought he could win things with Ireland and he thought he could win European Cups. So he's exactly the type of player Munster need. They need to fill their team with guys who think, I can play for Ireland, and don't just say it but actually train like it and behave like that they have that desperation to win for their club and their country. And I think the more players, when you get a critical amount of those players in a team, and Quinny would have been in one of those teams, you get 8, 9, 10 guys thinking like that, and then you're back in business. And I think he's one certainly who will bring a bit of that to them.
We're just seeing some shots there of youthful Eoin Reddan and a youthful Alan Quinlan, not today or yesterday.
Me and I knew Reds are in training and on the pitch, and we played against each other as well. But look, we had good fun anyway, and it's I value your opinion there because it's intriguing to hear how you're talking about how Munster are going to try and attack and maybe play to their strengths, which a big part of that is the kicking game as well.
Owen, excellent. Thanks a million for joining us.
No problem, guys. See you now.
Thanks a lot. Eoin Reddan there on the line. Just a quick one on Tykes Byrne before we get back into the game. What about that point about the different style that the Scarlets play, and it's a much more sort of running game maybe that he might be used to when he gets to Munster? Is that just, Eoin seems to think it's not really a great problem that actually when he comes in it'll
because
just assimilate.
And maybe if the 10 situation changes, or if somebody comes in the 10 position, that they maybe might change their game a bit and develop it a bit more. And look, Johan van Graan is only in a couple of months, and I think what Rassie Erasmus did when he came in is he made Munster very robust, and Jack Nienaber defensively made him really good at their kicking game, and they played to that kind of to their strengths there. And then they have a lot of good ball carriers, and they relied on that kind of relentless intensity, and it got them a lot of great results last year. When you come to the business end of the year, Adrian, you need that extra little bit of variety and attack. And look, every team will strive to be like a Leinster now, to be able to roll up your sleeves and play it, kind of get down and dirty and play it. Like he said up front, they can maul. Their ball carriers are excellent. They're brilliant at the breakdown. They have a good kicking game. And if the game gets a bit ugly, they can kind of play that game as well, which they showed last week. So, that's what every team will strive to have, and there's no team that just wants to say, well, we don't want to be an attacking team. Everybody wants to attack. So he'll actually bring some attack and some variety, particularly out around the midfield and open phases, where he can do little loop plays and stuff like that, and offloads and stuff. So he'll help that situation. Okay, does he want to play in a team that are going to kick it so much? So I think he'll probably have an ambition to play a bit more as well. So he'll want that. So he'll actually bring some new ideas as well, maybe of stuff that he's learned in the Scarlets, like Redzer was saying. So, I don't think it's a problem. He's not coming into a team who are going to be really negative, if you like. I think they'll want to be more positive with the way they play, particularly from what they've learned last season and this season.
Yeah, I think he was let go by Leinster, obviously, and a guy who was given an opportunity over there.
He's a bit of a late developer and superb opportunity. Yeah. And
you mentioned there...
we let Redzer go out of Munster as well. And
I know,
what happened.
Yeah.
And Sean Cronin. So we've a couple of Munster men who've achieved incredible stuff in Leinster as well. So it can happen.
I enjoyed your little sort of under the table dig there at Leinster. Well, their Munster success incoming. You mentioned 10 at Munster next season. Is it just a case of that they might? I think you said they may make a change there next season. Is it a case that Blaindale comes in and he's the guy in possession? And
look, it's not any criticism directly at any one of the three, but I think you guys both know consistency in such a pivotal position is important.
And in big games, you need.
So we've had
players.
Ian Keatley has probably been the mainstay this season. Tyler Blaindale last season. JJ has now come into the picture. So there's a lot of chopping and changing. I know that happens in the league scenario if one of your 10s is away with Ireland, which is the Leinster situation. 2 of their 10s are away. But I just think that consistency has created uncertainty with performance, with confidence, with self-belief. You know, they need to get that position filled by somebody who's going to be their number one choice.
You need one of those three to step up and say, I'm the man.
Yeah, and perform at a really high level in the big games, in these big pivotal games. And unfortunately, the big games that they've lost, like last year Saracens game, you know, Tyler Blendell didn't have his best game and he had a really good season. Maybe Ian Keatley's performance this year against Racing. You're talking about control under massive
what do you
pressure
do?
at a different level. Well, look, you're looking for top quality and you're looking for
bring someone in?
Well, yeah, possibly, I think, yeah. I think, well, look, this uncertainty and we don't know what Tyler Blendell's injury is. And look, in fairness, he played superb last year and there's been times this year when Ian Keatley's been superb as well. But it's that world-class position scenario where you look at teams who win big trophies have world-class in those positions, and it's not always easy to get world-class, and again it seems like it's a massive criticism on the current guys, but more competition and higher level, which can even bring on, you see what Sexton has done with the Carberries, with the Ross Byrnes, it actually you learn so much off these guys, and one of them has got to take the lead. If Munster don't sign somebody, they've got to take the lead and, you know, be in the Irish setup. So you want your 10 in provincially to be challenging.
Carberry would be a good fit.
Well, if it happened, yeah, either Ross Byrne, I think Harry Byrne, his brother is
apparently as good, if not better.
Has a trend with Ireland as well, you know. So there's a lot of quality here in Leinster, and look, all the provinces would be looking at someone like that. But it may not happen. There's a lot of complications. The 3 out halves are contracted next year in Munster, so I don't know how they work that one out. If I was one of the 10s, and what do? You pay someone out, or you ask them, do they mind going to another province? Well, that's not going to work. So I don't know how this thing is going to play out.
Tomorrow should shed some further light on it, but how big is the gap between Munster and Leinster once you add Byrne into the situation?
Well, the gap is it's hard to measure that gap, Owen. I think Leinster, the gap with Leinster and the vast majority of teams in Europe, based on what we've seen, the evidence we've seen, because you look at them, Glasgow were flying it in the league. Leinster go and get a bonus point win, and you're like, geez, this is a serious enough performance. Then they go to Exeter and really have to dog out a win as well, against a very physical, abrasive Exeter side who were champions of England. In a very intimidating place. Sandy Park is a tough place to go, and they get the job done there. They go to Montpellier then in round 6, was it? The last game. And, you know, another away, a really impressive away performance against the top 14 leaders. So, you know, you're talking about the gap between Munster and Leinster. The gap between some of these big teams is Leinster are out in front, and they've shown that. But then I think, you know, you Byrne coming in, Arno Bota signed now, he's replacing Robin Copeland. You know, maybe if you get another second or another tight head and maybe a 10. So they're probably 2 or 3 positions away from putting a team on paper and saying, this is a really, really good side. This is an exciting side because you have Taute, Scannell, Sam Arnold has been really good. Chris Farrell comes back. That's 4 good centres. You have a lot of pace in the back 3. Sweetenham, Wotton, Earls, Conway, and Mike Haley is signed from Sale. So you're looking at a little bit of depth then. I think then, you know, you go up front and there's a lot of good players there as well. So a couple of key positions would help them. The difference with Leinster and those other teams that I'm talking about is the depth.
Yeah.
And you're talking about depth that there's not a huge difference. Jack McGrath will come in this week. There's not a lot of difference between himself and Cian Healy, and either one could. Jack McGrath could come and take the reins again because he's such a quality player. He's, you know, was on the lines last year. Andrew Porter, great backup for Tadhg Furlong. Rhys Ruddock, Jack Conan, these guys are going to come in and you could slot any of these guys into an Irish team at the moment and they perform. So it's that depth enables obviously Leo Cullen cope with so many internationals away. So he's created a lot of depth, and the A and B scenario, that's where they're ahead of other teams, is the depth. On paper, if Munster get everyone fit, you know, and maybe one or two signings, the gap isn't as huge on paper that way, but I think the gap is big with the depth.
So are Munster going to beat Leinster B?
It's Leinster A.5 or B.5, whatever way you look at it. I'm not sure. I don't think that. Part of me thinks earlier in the week I thought, look, they're too good. They've so many strings to their bow. Their attack is superb. If you're going to beat Leinster, a team as good as Leinster, you got to score tries. You got to have variety to your game. And I think the frustration of watching Munster against Racing, where they couldn't break them down, I kind of envisage a scenario like that where Munster just, give it everything and play with a lot of pride and passion, that it'll just come up a little bit too short. But then there's a little bit of a chink of light with maybe possibly no Sexton, no Robbie Henshaw, world-class players. You take them out of that group. I know we're talking about the depth. And if I was in the Munster dressing room, and honestly, I'm getting a bit kind of fired up about this in the last day or two, that this is a massive challenge. It's backs to the wall stuff. You're going to the RDS, you're playing the European champions. Do we go with the scripts and say, well, we give it everything, we get a pat in the back for good effort and Leinster go on to the final? Or can I affect that? Can I step up here and... Because it is a life-changing thing. You beat Leinster, you're in a final, you win a trophy, you could end up jumping on a plane to Australia, you could win Joe Schmidt over. There's a number of guys in that position, and it's a massive thing. So that kind of gives me a little bit of uplift, if you like, that maybe Munster, if they adopt that approach, and I think they will, I just worry that they'll maybe come up short with a little bit of execution and quality, and Leinster maybe will learn from the past, particularly in 2011. So Leinster on paper will win the game, I think, slightly.
Right. That's...
It's not a bold prediction, is it?
No, it's not a bold prediction, but I'm surprised to hear you say... I mean,
I'm not going to wear the... I'm not going to go... Munster... I think Munster can, and believe me, I'll jump around the RDS tomorrow and be delighted if they do, and I don't have to hide that to anyone. But on paper and quality-wise, Leinster, I think, probably get over the line. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. All right.
What do you think?
I think Leinster will probably get it done, to be honest with you. I think that freshening it up with potentially, like they're talking about Carberry even at 15,
back us up here on. Give us a bit of hope from another Munster man.
Freshen it up at 10. Like, there's a lot of these are sort of enforced, but actually I think there will be a benefit to, like we spoke at the very top of the conversation with Owen about 2011.
Bring a bit of energy, yeah.
That was a Joe Schmidt team in 2011, right? Like, this is a guy who leaves no stones unturned in terms of that week-long turnaround, and it's the same dynamic. But I think that bit of freshness of the players, I think that Stuart Lancaster, I think, will have a big impact this week in terms of...
Just on that, like, I know you kind of facetiously asked the question, Munster versus Leinster B tomorrow, but is it kind of a bit grim if Leinster comfortably beat Munster tomorrow, given...
I don't think it'd be comfortable either way, right?
If they comfortably beat Munster, absolutely it is grim.
But so even, say, a narrow win after the celebrating that's been done this week?
No, I don't. I think the celebrating this week would have been far different than in 2009 or 2011 or 2012 because of maybe, dragging it on till Wednesday or Thursday before you go, okay, we now have a match against Munster at the weekend in a semi-final or final. I think the sole focus, particularly with the coaches, they wouldn't have let themselves go as regards, how do we play next week, who are we selecting, who are we going to train, what's the plan for the week. So I think the focus would have been really very, very narrow and ready to go straight after the game. And that's professional rugby now. So I think the players, of course, they would have had a few pints and had fun and enjoyed it. But I guarantee you their game faces were on earlier this week than they were on in 2011.
And that'll make the Munster win even sweeter than tomorrow.
Well, you do get a chance to have a look at the game last weekend from a Munster point of view and have a look at some of that Racing defence, like
Johnny Sexton said it after the game.
That sort of shallow defence.
Redder has said it. You stop Leinster, and that's out of respect. You try and stop a brilliant team who are really good at attacking, and when they get on the front foot, they can really dominate. So you get in their faces, you defend well, you stay connected in defence, you harry the breakdown, you slow it down. If they get quick ball, they're very lots of threats and good, intelligent players, Adrian, who make good decisions. And intelligence is something that's not kind of mentioned enough, because players in the heat of the moment making good decisions about ball carriers, getting in a little bit of space, recycling the ball, which leads on and builds up to other stuff. So they have a lot of intelligent players. But I do believe Munster will, you know, they'll give it a good rattle, and hopefully they can. Look, I'm saying it as a Munster man. I think it'd be good for Irish rugby if Munster were to get across the line here. It would make it more of a competitive, keep that competitiveness between the rivalry, because Leinster win again, is that gap getting bigger?
Well, it's 4-2 in the Old Champions Cup tally as well, Quinny, as you know. So
well, look, you were second up Everest anyway, so that's fine.
But then went up 4 times, so that's sort of makes up.
But the flag was already up there, so every time you go up, just remember us.
I think even in the context of Irish rugby, the Ulster Ospreys game
Ulster had the flag up actually first.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
So
I
mean,
they
did get a bit of an escalator to give them a bit of a help up, at least part of that.
Helicopter ride halfway.
Just a couple of quick comments, because I know we're holding you from your porridge. Darragh O'Toole says Leinster are missing a lot of key players. It'll be interesting to see a real test of this Leinster depth. And Trevor here, you can take this as you wish, but I wouldn't build that game up too much, lads. Leinster fans couldn't care less about the Pro 14.
Oh, brilliant.
And the players aren't bothered, as there's no real rivalry. Just want to be on holidays now, he says. Good chance for Munster to get a trophy, though.
It'd be nice.
It's going to become a battle of who cares less about this game. Munster giving back 1,000 tickets, and it's like in the post-match analysis.
I tell you, I guarantee you, there's no players in that field tomorrow will care less about.
They will care, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Quinny, pleasure as always. Thanks a million. Thanks for coming into us. It's Alan Quinlan previewing the game of the weekend.